Morning, Glory America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt inside a warming up beltway. It's finally starting to get to a decent level of temperature here. So, a good day ahead. I want to welcome General David Deptula. Lieutenant General Deptula is retired from the United States Air Force. He is Dean now of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. He joins me to talk about strategery and military matters as often as I can get him. Good morning, General. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Hugh. Very good. How about you?
Great. I want to talk a little bit about Iran. I got an email from a retired member or general of a different branch who wrote to me some thoughts on Soleimani's death. Everyone is replaceable, he wrote, but not all replacements have the same capabilities and capacities. Major describes the situation this way, and maybe a very good analogy. Soleimani was playing speed chess. He was working multiple boards against multiple opponents. In that regard, he was not only managing each individual game, but to the best of our knowledge, he was the only mind that was orchestrating the complex outcomes into some kind of cohesive whole. Now, not just each game is disrupted, but the orchestration is disrupted. It goes on to expand that the loss of Soleimani really hasn't registered in the West yet. What do you make of this, General Deptula?
Well, I think the individual who sent you that information is very accurate. Let me also add that yesterday at the Mitchell Institute, we had speak to us Major General Grinkowicz, who is currently the deputy commander of the Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, which is charged with dealing with the Islamic State, of which is a huge problem in the region. He's also the commander of all the air forces in the Levant and Iraq, and he gave us some insight into the impact of the loss of Soleimani. And just like your contributor mentioned, and what I like to tell people and remind them is that leadership matters, and individuals do matter. And yeah, he might have a replacement, but what the general on active duty who just came over from Iraq told us was that Soleimani. Well, first let me do it this way. There are over 100 different Iranian-supported militia groups in Iraq, in Syria, and throughout the region. And what Soleimani was a master at doing is providing them direction and keeping them all aligned for unified action. Now he's gone, so it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to regain the kind of leadership that Soleimani provided and the connections that he had to keep all these groups under control, if you will, or headed in the direction that Iran wants them to go. Now, that could be good, that could be bad. We don't know, because he had the ability to control them and restrain action when necessary, and then to commit to action when he wanted. So we've yet to see the dramatic impact of his loss in the region.
General Deptula, I tried to make the analogy to another friend. It was like the death of Yamamoto in World War II, and they said, no, Yamamoto only ran the Japanese Imperial Navy. The army was different, the Nazis were different, the Italians were different. He had one big part of a very big war. Soleimani had every aspect of Iran's multinational, multi-level combat with the West under direct control, and he had a relationship with the supreme leader that no successor is going to have. Do you
Right.
agree with that?
Absolutely. And it will, in the near term, absolutely. Over the long term, we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to see if Soleimani's replacement can step into his shoes and pick up where he left off. But most folks who are familiar with the region, the general who visited us yesterday, doubt that kind of relationship, that kind of persuasive capability that Soleimani had over these militia groups will not be able to be reconstituted anytime soon. Soleimani had a persona and he had a charisma. He could speak Arabic very fluently as well as Farsi. That's not the case with his follow-on. That's very fundamental, but it's also something that builds trust and capability that if you don't have, it's kind of hard to reestablish and regain.
Yeah, intelligence has its own charisma, competence has its own charisma, but charisma has its own charisma, and he had undeniable charisma among the Shiite world, and now he's gone. So
Yep.
the next question, why didn't we do it 5 years ago?
Well, that's an extraordinarily important equation. What happened? Well, part of the reason we didn't do it 5 years ago is we had a different set of political leadership here in the United States, who not only didn't lay down hard red lines that once crossed, they acted. But that's how I would tell you the Russians got a toehold back into the Mideast region, is because of the former administration's lack of resolve and stepping up and supporting the actions that they said they would take if certain red lines were crossed. I'm specifically talking about what happened with respect to Assad using chemical weapons and the lack of action when they did by the Obama administration, which then gave the Russians the entree to move into the region because they basically said, hey, if the U.S. isn't going to act, there's no threat. They're not going to push back if we move into the region, so there we go. So some of these basic issues make a difference when it comes to world politics. With respect to Soleimani, you had a very risk-averse previous administration, and in fact, they played into the Iranian hands by negotiating the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement with them, which did nothing but just push the Iranians' capability to develop a nuclear weapon down the road.
Now, I want to switch subjects on you very quickly, General. Yesterday, Admiral Stavridis and I just spent 2 minutes talking about the Wuhan coronavirus. Chinese movies are being canceled. Chinese cities, including one of 7.5 million, in addition to Wuhan, are locked down. The military plans for this sort of thing, because the Spanish flu decimated our troops in 1918 to 1920. What do you make of the early response in the United States to this? Are we playing it about right, or ought we to be setting up a few more flares?
I think we're playing it about right. I think people are paying appropriate attention. They're taking action to take a look at, monitor people who are coming in from suspect areas. And I think it's a prudent action that we need to continue to move in that regard. And depending upon the severity of what happens, we should respond accordingly.
Does the Joint Staff take note of such a pandemic potential? Is that an issue that will rise up to the chairman? Will it be in the tank? Or do you have to be summoned by the White House to the game? Eventually, the military got involved with the Ebola situation. What do you think?
No, these kinds of issues are monitored in the Department of Defense and in across the board. I mean, the chairman gets briefed on a daily basis of what's going on around the world, and this clearly would get to his attention. With respect to actions that are taken, that's all dependent upon the severity of the conditions and how U.S. soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines may be affected.
General David Deptula, always a pleasure.